The sun dipped low in the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the busy streets. Captain Elijah Thompson adjusted his tie as he walked toward the precinct, a familiar blend of anticipation and anxiety swirling in his chest. It had been a long day filled with meetings about community outreach, and he was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. Little did he know, the routine nature of his day would soon be shattered. As he stepped into the precinct, the air felt heavy with tension. Officers milled about, their conversations punctuated by the occasional clatter of equipment and the low hum of police radios. Elijah exchanged nods with his colleagues, forcing a smile despite the undercurrent of unease that had gripped the department in recent months. He had long been an advocate for reform, but the resistance from some factions within the force was palpable. "Hey, Captain," called a familiar voice from the break room. It was Captain Jasmine Rivers, her curly hair pulled back into a tight bun, her piercing green eyes radiating determination. She was a firebrand, driven by a fierce sense of justice. "Jasmine," Elijah replied, walking over. "You look like you're ready to take on the world. Just another day in paradise," she said with a wry smile. "What about you? Ready to tackle those community meetings again?" "Always," he replied, though his heart wasn't in it. "But maybe I'll sneak a drink at the bar later." "I could use a break. Count me in," she said, her expression turning serious. "We need to blow off some steam." "I've been hearing whispers about the usual suspects stirring up trouble again," Elijah nodded, aware of the tension rising in the community regarding police conduct. The protests had been escalating, fueled by incidents of police brutality and racial profiling that had sparked outrage across the city. It felt like a powder keg waiting to explode, and Elijah was determined to do his part to prevent an explosion. Later that evening, Elijah and Jasmine finished their shift and made their way to a local bar, a cozy spot where officers and community members mingled, sharing stories and laughter. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the sound of jazz playing softly in the background. They settled into a corner booth, ordering drinks as they discussed the day's events and the challenges faced by their department. "Sometimes I feel like we're fighting a losing battle," Elijah admitted, taking a sip of his drink. "There's so much resistance to change. Change takes time," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "But we can't give up. We're the ones who can make a difference," Elijah nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They were both aware of the systemic issues they faced, issues that often left them feeling powerless. But they also knew that if they didn't try, who would? As they spoke, the atmosphere in the bar shifted. The door swung open and a group of officers entered, led by none other than Officer Mike Hawkins. Mike was a bulldog of a man, with a rugged appearance and a scowl that rarely left his face. He was known for his hardline views and an us versus them mentality that clashed with the more progressive ideals of Elijah and Jasmine. "Look who it is," Mike called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he spotted Elijah and Jasmine. "The Reform Twins. What are you two up to? Plotting to change the world?" Elijah felt his blood boil at the mocking tone, but he took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Just having a drink, Mike." "What brings you here?" "Just checking in on my fellow officers," Mike replied, his eyes narrowing. "You know, making sure we don't get too cozy with the community." "They're not exactly our friends. Maybe they should be," Jasmine shot back, her voice firm. "We're supposed to serve and protect, not intimidate and alienate." The tension in the air was palpable, and Elijah could sense the eyes of the other patrons drifting toward their table. He wanted to defuse the situation before it escalated, but Mike was relentless. "Look, you two can play the nice cops all you want, but don't forget where you came from," Mike said, his voice low and threatening. "You think the community loves you. They don't care about you. They just want to see us fail." "That's where you're wrong, Mike," Elijah interjected, his voice steady. "People want to see us do our jobs with respect and integrity. They want to feel safe, not terrorized." Mike stepped closer, his scowl deepening. "You're living in a fantasy. The real world doesn't work that way." Suddenly, a shout erupted from outside, piercing the charged atmosphere of the bar. Elijah's heart raced as he recognized the voice of a young man, the same voice he had heard at recent protests demanding justice for victims of police brutality. "Enough is enough. We want accountability." The voice cried out, rallying the crowd outside the bar. Elijah exchanged a glance with Jasmine, their earlier conversation about the community's unrest flooding back. They both knew this was no longer just about them, it was about the very principles they stood for. "Let's go," Jasmine said, determination etched on her face. "We need to see what's happening." As they stepped outside, the atmosphere shifted from the cozy bar to the chaotic energy of the street. A crowd had gathered, chanting for justice, their voices echoing off the buildings. The sight of the protest sent a shiver down Elijah's spine. But then, just as they were about to join the crowd, the situation escalated. Officer Hawkins, still simmering with anger, pushed past them, ready to confront the protesters. "Stand back," he barked, his voice harsh as he brandished his badge. "You're crossing the line." Elijah's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. This was at the moment that would change everything. It was no longer just a protest. It was a flashpoint in a battle that had been brewing for far too long. "Mike, wait!" Elijah shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. And in that moment, everything spiraled out of control. Elijah knew they had to intervene to prevent the incident from escalating further. But as he stepped forward, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the shadows of injustice lurking just beneath the surface. "Jasmine," he said, determination flooding his veins. "We have to do something." They were about to find themselves at the center of a storm that would test their resolve, their beliefs, and their commitment to justice. "Together," she replied, her eyes ablaze with purpose. As they moved to confront the brewing chaos, the shadows of justice began to take shape around them, and the fight for change had only just begun. The sounds of the protest echoed in Elijah's ears long after they had left the bar. He could still hear the chants, the cries for justice, resonating with a deep urgency. The energy of the crowd had been electric, a raw expression of frustration and pain. But that energy quickly shifted to one of chaos when Officer Hawkins pushed through the throng, his badge gleaming in the streetlights as he barked orders. Elijah and Jasmine had witnessed something they both feared would happen, the escalation of tension between police and the community they were sworn to protect. "Do you think he'll really confront them?" Jasmine asked, her voice low as they walked briskly down the sidewalk, following the sounds of the gathering crowd. "If he does, it could turn ugly," Elijah replied, his gut churning. "We need to get there before something happens." As they approached the scene, the crowd swelled, a sea of faces filled with determination and anger. Signs waved high above heads, some bearing the names of victims of police violence, others demanding accountability. Each face told a story, a narrative of pain that had been ignored for too long. "Captain Thompson, Captain Rivers." The shout came from a young man in the crowd, his face flushed with passion. "We need your help." "They're not listening." Elijah turned to Jasmine, and they both felt the weight of expectation settle on their shoulders. They were in a unique position, officers of the law who were also part of the community. But the chasm between those two identities felt wider than ever. "Let's move," Elijah said, determination fueling his stride. They forged through the crowd, weaving between the throngs of protesters. As they reached the front, they found Hawkins standing defiantly, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the crowd with suspicion. "Mike," Elijah called out, raising his hands to signal he meant no harm. "You need to step back. This isn't how we handle things." Hawkins turned, his jaw tightening at the sight of them. "You think they'll listen to you? They don't care about us, Elijah." The crowd had quieted, sensing the tension between the three officers. Elijah felt the weight of their collective gaze, the expectation that he would somehow bridge the gap. "They care about justice, Mike," Jasmine interjected, stepping beside Elijah. "And right now, you're not helping." Hawkins' eyes narrowed. "And what do you suggest?" "We coddle them. Let them think they can do whatever they want." Elijah's patience wore thin. "This isn't about coddling. It's about understanding. You're not their enemy. You're supposed to be their protector." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Elijah could see some protesters nodding in agreement. They were looking to him and Jasmine for guidance, but he felt the pressure of their expectations weighing heavily on his shoulders. "Look," he continued, trying to inject calm into the volatile atmosphere. "We're all here because we want the same thing, a safer community. But that won't happen with this us versus them mentality. We need to listen." The moment hung in the air, charged with tension. Hawkins remained unmoved, but the crowd seemed to soften, their anger shifting toward uncertainty. "Listen to what?" Hawkins challenged, his voice rising. "To their lives, they don't want peace. They want chaos, Mike," Jasmine said, her tone firm but measured. "You're making it worse. They're not here to incite violence. They're here because they're tired of being treated like criminals in their own neighborhoods. Enough." Hawkins roared, stepping forward as if to assert his authority. "You don't want to coddle them. Fine, but don't expect me to stand by and watch as they take over our streets." In that moment, Elijah felt a shift in the crowd, a collective breath, a flicker of uncertainty. He knew he had to act fast. The situation was teetering on the brink of confrontation. "Everyone, please," Elijah called out, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "We hear you. We're here to listen, but we need you to give us a chance to do our jobs." The murmur grew louder, voices overlapping as people expressed their frustrations. Elijah scanned the faces in the crowd, searching for someone to help him forge a connection. "Let's have a dialogue," he suggested, glancing at Jasmine for support. "We can't solve this overnight, but we can start talking. We need to understand each other." A young woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "We've been talking for years. How many times have we told you what we need? We need accountability. We need change." Elijah met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right," he said, sincerity lacing his tone, "and we're committed to making that happen, but it has to be a two-way street. We need to work together." As the crowd began to process his words, Elijah felt a surge of hope. This was their chance to break down barriers, to begin a dialogue that could reshape the narrative. But just as the tension seemed to ease, a loud voice from the back of the crowd shouted, "What about the officers who hurt our friends? Will they be held accountable?" The question hung heavy in the air, and Elijah felt the knot tighten in his stomach. This was the heart of the matter, the accountability that had been so sorely lacking. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "We are committed to accountability. We want to ensure that every officer is held to the same standard we expect from ourselves." The crowd's response was mixed. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained skeptical. But in that moment, Elijah knew they had made a crack in the wall separating them from the community. Suddenly, the air was filled with sirens, blaring in the distance. The sound sent a ripple of panic through the crowd, and Elijah's heart sank. "Everyone, please remain calm," he shouted, but the crowd began to surge, people pushing back as they sought to escape the approaching police vehicles. "Mike, we need to de-escalate," Jasmine urged, her voice rising above the noise. Hawkins, however, seemed more focused on asserting his authority than listening to reason. "They need to understand that we won't back down," he barked, stepping toward the crowd, which only intensified the panic. "Stop," Elijah shouted, stepping in front of Hawkins. "You're only making it worse." But before he could react, Hawkins shoved past him, striding toward the edge of the crowd. "Enough of this nonsense. We're the law." Elijah felt his heart race as he watched the scene unfold. This was spiraling out of control, and the last thing they needed was violence. "Jasmine, we have to take charge," Elijah said, urgency coursing through him. "We can't let this turn into a crisis." As the sirens grew louder, the crowd became a mass of chaos, and Elijah knew they had to act quickly. "Get their attention, Jasmine," he shouted, his heart pounding. With a determined nod, Jasmine stepped forward, raising her voice above the tumult. "Everyone, listen, we're here to help. We want to talk." But the moment seemed lost as Hawkins continued to incite the crowd, his presence a catalyst for unrest. Elijah felt a surge of frustration and fear as he realized the precarious situation they were in. They were teetering on the brink of something much larger than themselves, and if they didn't act decisively, the consequences could be dire. "Together," he said, grasping Jasmine's arm. "We have to show them we're on their side." With determination in their eyes, they moved to intervene, ready to fight for the change they so desperately wanted to see. The shadows of justice loomed ominously over them, but they were prepared to face the storm head-on. Together, they would navigate the chaos and strive for a new beginning, one where hope could flourish amid the shadows. The chaos of the protest lingered in Elijah's mind as he paced in the small conference room at the precinct the following day. The events of the night before played on repeat. Hawkins' aggression, the crowd's fear, and the flickering hope that had sparked when he and Jasmine tried to intervene. It was a fragile moment, one that could be easily crushed under the weight of systemic prejudice. Elijah glanced at the clock on the wall. Time felt like it was moving too slowly. Jasmine was supposed to arrive any minute, and they needed to strategize. They were at a crossroads, and the decisions they made now could alter the course of their fight for justice. When the door swung open, Jasmine stepped inside, her expression a mixture of resolve and concern. "I've been thinking about how we can approach this," she said, taking a seat across from Elijah. "We need to rally support from within the department. If we can't get our colleagues on board, we're fighting a losing battle." "I agree," Elijah replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But we have to be careful. Hawkins has a strong hold on a lot of the older officers. They're set in their ways, and they see us as a threat, that we need to make it clear that we're not the enemy," Jasmine said, leaning forward, her green eyes intense. "We're fighting for the same thing they should be: community safety and respect. If we can get Sergeant Lopez on our side, she might help sway some of the others." Elijah nodded, recalling Maria's unwavering dedication to her community, but also her struggle to maintain her position within the department. "Maria's been caught in the middle for too long. If we can show her that we're serious about reform, she might be willing to help us." Just then, the precinct's door swung open again, and Sergeant Maria Lopez entered, her dark hair pulled back tightly, a fierce expression on her face. "I heard you two were in here plotting," she said with a hint of a smile. "What's the plan?" Elijah and Jasmine exchanged glances, relieved to see her. "We need to talk about what happened last night," Elijah said, gesturing for Maria to sit. "We're concerned about how Hawkins is handling the situation. It's only going to escalate if we don't do something." Maria nodded, her demeanor shifting to serious. "I was at the precinct when the call came in. I saw the footage of the protest. It was chaotic. But what struck me most was seeing you two in the middle of it, trying to bridge the gap. We can't keep ignoring the issues," Jasmine emphasized. "We need to bring our fellow officers into the conversation. If we don't, we'll never get anywhere." Maria leaned back, arms crossed. "You know the department is resistant to change. Many of the officers still believe in the old ways. Hawkins has a lot of influence." Elijah leaned forward, urgency rising in his voice. "Which is why we need you, Maria. You're respected among the ranks. If you stand with us, it can make a difference." She hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. "I want to help, but I've seen how this goes. I've been caught between wanting to support justice and my duty to my colleagues. It's a dangerous line to walk." "Then let's walk together," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "We're not asking you to choose a side. We're asking you to help create a new side, one that values accountability and community." Maria studied them for a moment, weighing her options. "All right," she finally said, the determination in her voice growing. "But we need a plan. We can't just go in guns blazing. We'll need a strategy that appeals to their sense of duty and professionalism." Elijah felt a spark of hope. "What if we organized a town hall meeting? We could invite officers and community members alike, creating a space where everyone can voice their concerns and ideas." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "That could work. It would show the community that we're listening and that we're serious about engaging with them, and it puts pressure on the department to respond." "What about Hawkins?" Jasmine asked, her brow furrowed. "We can't just ignore his influence. He'll try to undermine us. Let him," Maria said with a hint of defiance. "If we can get enough support from the community and the progressive officers, he won't be able to stand in our way, but we'll need to be strategic. We have to frame this as an opportunity for improvement, not as a direct attack on the department." Elijah felt a rush of adrenaline as their plan began to take shape. "Let's set a date for the town hall. We can start reaching out to community leaders and other officers who might be sympathetic to our cause." Jasmine's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "I know a few community organizers who would be willing to help us spread the word. If we can get them on board, we could have a solid turnout." Maria smiled, the tension in the room lifting slightly. "Then it's settled. We'll plan this meeting and present it as a chance for collaboration. But we need to prepare for pushback, especially from Hawkins. Let's get to work," Elijah said, rising from his seat. "We have a lot to do, and we need to move fast. Change doesn't happen overnight." But we can't afford to wait any longer. As they began to outline their plan, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. They were not just fighting for their department. They were fighting for their community, for justice, and for a future free from the shadows of racism and injustice. Hours later, they gathered in the precinct's small meeting room, a sense of urgency fueling their discussions. Elijah and Jasmine reached out to community leaders, crafting flyers and spreading the word about the upcoming town hall meeting. Each conversation ignited a flicker of optimism, and with every supportive voice, they felt their resolve strengthen. But as the days passed, the undercurrents of resistance began to surface. Rumors circulated among their peers about the meeting, and Elijah could sense the tension in the precinct grow. Officers whispered in corners, casting skeptical glances as he and Jasmine walked by. One afternoon, as Elijah was organizing materials for the meeting, he was confronted by Officer Hawkins. The burly figure loomed in the doorway, his scowl as fierce as ever. "I heard about your little event," Hawkins said, his voice low and threatening. "You really think you can change anything?" Elijah squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "We're trying to create dialogue, Mike, something this department desperately needs." Hawkins stepped closer, his presence imposing. "Dialogue? You think those people care about talking? They want chaos, and you're playing right into their hands. We're trying to protect the community," Elijah replied, his heart racing. "You should care about that too." Hawkins let out a harsh laugh, his disdain palpable. "You're living in a dream. Thompson, you'll see how wrong you are when this all blows up in your face." With that, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him. Elijah felt a chill run down his spine, but he knew they couldn't let fear dictate their actions. They had to be brave, to stand firm in their commitment to justice. As the date of the town hall approached, Elijah and Jasmine continued to rally support, even as the tension in the precinct reached a boiling point. They were determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead, ready to confront the shadows of justice and fight for a brighter future for Atlanta. Together, they would stand against the tide of resistance, united in their quest for change. The day of the town hall meeting arrived with a mix of anticipation and anxiety swirling in the air. Elijah stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his uniform one last time. The crisp fabric felt like a reminder of both his duty and the weight of the moment ahead. He was determined, but doubt lingered just beneath the surface. Would their efforts lead to real change, or would they be met with the same resistance that had plagued the department for so long? "Ready," Jasmine's voice broke through his thoughts, filled with a blend of excitement and trepidation. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, forcing a smile. "Let's hope we have a good turnout." They arrived at the community center, the venue chosen for its neutral ground, a place where officers and residents could come together. As they entered, Elijah was struck by the sight of a diverse crowd gathering, a mix of community members, local leaders, and fellow officers. He felt a surge of optimism, but it was quickly tempered by the sight of Officer Hawkins leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, a scowl etched on his face. "Looked like Mike couldn't resist showing up," Jasmine muttered, her eyes narrowing at the sight of him. Elijah sighed, knowing that Hawkins' presence would only add tension to an already charged atmosphere, but they had come too far to back down now. "Let's focus on those who are willing to listen." As the meeting began, Elijah and Jasmine took their places at the front, flanked by community advocates who had agreed to speak. The atmosphere pulsed with energy, a mix of hope and skepticism radiating from the crowd. Officers exchanged glances, their expressions a blend of confusion and wariness. "Thank you all for being here today," Elijah began, his voice steady despite the nerves churning in his stomach. "We're here because we believe in the importance of dialogue between law enforcement and the community we serve. It's time we address the concerns that have been raised and work towards a solution together." Jasmine stepped forward, her presence commanding. "We understand that trust has been broken, and we want to change that. Tonight, we're not here to lecture or dictate. We're here to listen and learn from each other," the crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement while others remained skeptical. Elijah spotted a few familiar faces among the community members, activists he had seen at protests, residents who had shared their stories of pain and injustice. Each one represented a voice that had long been ignored. As they opened the floor for discussion, a young woman raised her hand, her expression filled with determination. "How can we trust you when we've seen officers get away with harming our friends?" "What about accountability?" Elijah felt the weight of her question settle over the room. "That's a valid concern, and it's something we're actively working to address. We want to ensure that every officer is held accountable for their actions. We're committed to transparency in our processes, but how do we know that won't just be empty promises?" A man shouted from the back, his voice laced with anger. "We've heard it all before." Before Elijah could respond, Hawkins pushed his way to the front, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is a waste of time," he declared, his tone harsh. "You think these people care about accountability? They want to burn down everything we built." "Mike, please," Jasmine interjected, her voice firm. "This isn't about division. This is about coming together to find solutions," Hawkins scoffed, looking around the room, clearly unfazed. "Solutions? The only solution is to show force. They need to know there are consequences for their actions." Elijah felt the frustration boiling within him, but he knew he had to remain composed. "That kind of thinking only breeds more distrust, Mike. We can't approach this as an us versus them situation. We need to build relationships, not walls. Enough of this nonsense." Hawkins snapped, his voice rising. "These people don't care about you. They will turn on you the moment it suits them." Elijah took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We're trying to change that narrative, Mike. We're trying to show that we can be better for the sake of our community and our officers." The crowd was tense, waiting for someone to take charge. A local activist stepped forward, her voice resonating with strength. "We need accountability, not just from individual officers, but from the entire department. You need to show us that you're willing to change the culture that allows discrimination and violence to persist." Elijah nodded, feeling a wave of support from the crowd. "That's exactly what we're here to discuss. We want to create a culture of accountability and reform within the department, but we need your help to do it. We need your voices to hold us accountable." As the discussion continued, Elijah felt the tide beginning to shift. People were starting to open up, sharing their experiences and frustrations. Each story painted a vivid picture of the impact of systemic racism and police brutality. It was painful to hear, but it reinforced the urgency of their mission. But just as the atmosphere began to feel more constructive, Hawkins interjected again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And what makes you think this will change anything? You're just giving them a platform to air grievances." Elijah's patience wore thin. "This isn't just about airing grievances, Mike. It's about creating a space for healing and understanding. You can either be part of the solution, or you can stand on the sidelines and watch." Hawkins glared at him, his expression hardening. "You're playing a dangerous game, Thompson. You don't want to be seen as weak. Strength isn't about being aggressive." Jasmine shot back, her voice steady. "It's about having the courage to listen and to change." The tension in the room was palpable, but Elijah could feel the allies they had gathered around them, the voices of those who believed in reform and justice. One by one, community members began to speak up, sharing their stories of loss and resilience. They expressed their hopes for a future where officers would stand beside them, not against them. As the meeting came to a close, Elijah felt a sense of accomplishment. They had begun to forge connections, to lay the groundwork for a new understanding. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning. After the meeting, as people began to filter out, Elijah caught a moment with Jasmine. "This is just the start, isn't it?" he said, a mixture of hope and apprehension in his voice. "Absolutely," she replied, her green eyes bright with determination. "But we need to keep this momentum going. We can't let Hawkins or anyone else derail our progress." Elijah nodded, feeling the weight of their mission settle on his shoulders. They needed to gather evidence to support their claims, to expose the systemic issues that had long plagued their department. "Let's dig deeper," he said, conviction flooding his voice. "We need to investigate the incidents that have caused so much pain in our community. If we can gather evidence, we can push for real change." As they walked out of the community center, the shadows of justice loomed large, but for the first time, they felt a flicker of hope. They were ready to confront the challenges ahead, to stand together against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Together, they would embark on this investigation determined to uncover the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of their department. It was time to shine a light on the shadows that had long been allowed to fester, and to fight for the justice their community so desperately needed. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over Atlanta as Elijah and Jasmine sat in Elijah's modest office at the precinct. The room was cluttered with case files and community outreach materials, but there was an air of urgency that propelled them forward. They had gathered enough evidence over the past few days to confront Officer Mike Hawkins about his conduct and the systemic issues within the department. "Are you ready for this?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady but laced with tension. Elijah nodded, taking a deep breath as he leaned back in his chair. "We have to be. If we don't confront him now, we risk letting the culture of fear and bias fester." It's time someone stood up to him. They had spent the last week poring over complaint records, body cam footage from previous incidents, and testimonies from community members. It was a jarring journey through the harsh realities of policing, revealing a pattern of abuse and misconduct that Hawkins had either been a part of or had ignored. It was clear they couldn't let Hawkins continue to evade accountability. "Let's go over our points one more time," Jasmine said, pulling a notepad from her bag. "We need to stay focused and calm, no matter how he reacts." Elijah leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the desk. "We'll start by laying out the evidence of his actions. We need to show him the impact of his behavior not just on community relations, but on the officers who are trying to enact change, right?" Jasmine agreed, her green eyes narrowing with determination. "And we need to emphasize that the department is at a crossroads. We can either choose to continue down this path of division, or we can work towards real reform." Elijah felt a surge of confidence as they reviewed their strategy. They had a plan, and it was time to put it into action. "Let's do this," he said, rising to his feet. Together, they left the office and made their way down the sterile hallway of the precinct, the walls echoing with the distant sounds of officers going about their daily routines. As they approached the break room, Elijah's heart raced in anticipation. When they entered, they found Hawkins sitting at a table, flipping through a stack of files, a scowl etched on his rugged face. "Look who's here," Hawkins remarked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "The reform duo." "What can I do for you, Mike? We need to talk," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Hawkins leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Talk? What's there to talk about? You two are wasting your time, not if it can lead to real change," Jasmine interjected, stepping forward. "We've gathered evidence about several incidents that have harmed community relations. It's time to address the issue head-on." Hawkins erupted with laughter, the sound harsh and mocking. "You think you can intimidate me with your little files and complaints? This is how it works, Thompson. You think they care about you? They don't. They just want to see us fail." Elijah felt his blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm. "It's not about intimidation, Mike. It's about accountability. Your actions have consequences not just for the community, but for the officers who are genuinely trying to make a difference." Hawkins' expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "You're living in a fantasy world, Elijah. The real world doesn't work that way. Maybe it's time you took off the blinders," Jasmine shot back, her voice firm. "Your mentality is only contributing to the divide. We're here to show you that change is possible, but we need you to recognize your role in this. Recognize my role." Hawkins growled, leaning forward. "I'm the one keeping order. You to think you can just waltz in here and change everything? This isn't a game." Elijah took a deep breath, grounding himself. "This isn't a game for us, Mike. We're talking about lives, real people who have been hurt by the system. We can't continue to uphold a culture that promotes fear and aggression for a moment." Hawkins' expression flickered with uncertainty, but he quickly masked it with anger. "You want to change the culture? Fine, but don't expect me to play along with your little charade. I won't back down to the likes of you. Then you leave us no choice," Jasmine said, her voice unwavering. "We have the support of the community and fellow officers who believe in reform. We're not backing down, Mike. We'll expose the truth, no matter the repercussions." Hawkins stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You think you can rally the troops against me? You're naive, both of you. I have friends in high places who will protect me." The tension in the room escalated, palpable and electric. Elijah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This isn't about you, Mike. This is about the future of the department and the community we serve. We need to stand together for real change. Change? Hawkins spat, taking a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. You think you're going to transform this department. You're just making it worse. You're putting yourself at risk. Elijah felt a rush of adrenaline as he met Hawkins' gaze, unflinching. We're willing to take that risk. We've already seen what happens when we don't confront the issues. We're not going to be silent any longer. As Hawkins opened his mouth to respond, the door swung open and Sergeant Maria Lopez stepped inside, her expression serious. What's going on in here? She asked, sensing the charged atmosphere. Just a little discussion about accountability, Jasmine said, glancing at Maria. You need to hear this too. Accountability? Hawkins interjected, frustration clear in his voice. These to think they can just come in here and dictate terms. They're living in a dream. Mike, let's keep this civil, Maria said, her tone firm. We need to address these concerns. The community is demanding change, and it's our responsibility to listen. Hawkins scoffed, his eyes darting between them. And what do you think you're going to accomplish? You can't just ignore the reality of policing. Maybe it's time we redefine that reality, Elijah said, his voice rising with passion. We can't keep perpetuating a culture of fear. We need to be better, for our officers and for the community. Maria stepped forward, her stance unwavering. We're here to support reform, Mike. If you can't see that, then you're part of the problem. Hawkins glared at them, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. You think the community will stand by you? They're just waiting for us to slip up so they can pounce. Maybe if you treated them with respect, you'd find they're not the enemy, Jasmine countered, her voice steady. The tension in the room hung like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Elijah could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. They were on the verge of something monumental, a confrontation that could change the course of their department. Let's take this discussion to a larger forum, Elijah proposed, his voice steady. We need to talk about these issues openly with the entire department. It's time we confront the culture of fear and bias that's holding us back. Hawkins glared at them, but the resolve in Elijah's eyes was unwavering. You either stand with us or against us, Mike. The choice is yours. As Hawkins opened his mouth to object, Maria stepped in, her voice cutting through the tension. Let's take this to the precinct meeting tomorrow. We'll get everyone's input and address the concerns head-on. Elijah felt a rush of adrenaline as he realized they had the chance to bring the issue into the light. This is our moment, Mike. We're ready to confront the shadows of justice that have lingered for too long. Hawkins' expression darkened, but Elijah could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The confrontation was a turning point, a moment that would define their path forward. As they left the break room, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their mission for change. The shadows of justice loomed large, but for the first time, they felt a flicker of hope. Together, they would confront the darkness and fight for a brighter future for Atlanta. The next day, the precinct meeting room buzzed with tension as officers filed in, curious whispers filling the air. Elijah stood at the front, flanked by Jasmine and Maria, his heart racing. This was the moment they had prepared for, a chance to confront the systemic issues that plagued their department and seek a collective path forward. Thank you all for coming, Elijah began, his voice steady despite the anticipation coursing through him. He scanned the room, noting the faces of his colleagues, some skeptical, others curious. Officer Hawkins leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of disdain and defiance. We're here to address the community's concerns and discuss the reports of misconduct that have come to light. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on our practices and work toward meaningful reform, he continued, his gaze locking onto Hawkins for a brief moment. Hawkins shifted, the tension palpable as he opened his mouth to interject, but Jasmine quickly stepped forward, her voice commanding attention. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the pain and frustration felt by many in our community. We understand that trust has been broken, and we must take responsibility for that. This meeting is not just for us as officers. It's for our community, too. Elijah felt a surge of hope as he watched Jasmine address the room. Her passion was infectious, and he could see some officers nodding in agreement. They needed to create a culture of openness, one that encouraged dialogue rather than defensiveness. Let's start by discussing the specific incidents that have raised concerns, Maria suggested, pulling a folder from her bag. We need to examine our action and their impact on the community. As she laid out the evidence, complaints from community members, body cam footage, and testimonies, Elijah felt the weight of history pressed down on them. Each piece of evidence represented a voice that had been silenced for too long. "Look at the patterns here," Maria said, her voice steady. "These incidents are not isolated. They reveal a culture that allows misconduct to persist unchecked. If we want to change, we need to address these issues head-on." Hawkins scoffed from the back of the room. "You really think airing out dirty laundry will solve anything? This is just going to make us look weak." Elijah took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. "It's not about looking weak, Mike. It's about acknowledging our mistakes and taking responsibility. Strength comes from admitting when we failed and working together to do better." The room fell silent, the tension thickening as officers exchanged uncertain glances. They were at a crossroads, and Elijah knew they had to push forward. We can't ignore the community's demand for accountability. If we want to rebuild trust, we need to show that we're willing to listen. Jasmine nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "We need to hear from you, every officer in this room. What do you think we can do to create a culture of accountability? How can we ensure that our actions align with our commitment to serve and protect?" One of the younger officers, Officer Collins, raised his hand hesitantly. "I think we need more training on de-escalation and community relations. I've seen how things can spiral out of control, and we need to be better prepared." Elijah felt a flicker of hope. "That's an excellent point, Collins. Training is essential, but we also need to create an environment where officers feel empowered to speak up when they see something wrong." Another officer, Lieutenant Simmons, chimed in. "I agree. We need to establish clear protocols for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. It's crucial that we create a safe space for our officers to voice their concerns." As the discussion continued, Elijah felt the tide beginning to shift. They were moving toward a collective vision for reform, and the walls that had divided them were starting to crumble. But as the conversation deepened, Hawkins' frustration became increasingly evident. "This is all just talk," he interrupted, his voice rising. "You think you can change the culture overnight. It doesn't work that way. You'll be seen as weak, and the community will take advantage of that." Elijah stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're not trying to be weak, Mike. We're trying to be better. The community deserves officers who are trained to handle situations with care and respect, not aggression. We need to be allies, not adversaries." Hawkins' expression hardened, and Elijah could see the resistance simmering beneath the surface. "You can't just throw away everything we've built because of a few bad apples. The world is dangerous, and we have to protect ourselves. That's exactly the mentality we need to change." Jasmine replied, her voice unwavering. "Protecting ourselves shouldn't come at the cost of our community's safety. We need to build trust, not fear." The tension in the room escalated, but Elijah could feel a shift among his colleagues. More officers were joining the conversation, sharing their thoughts and frustrations. They were beginning to understand that this was not just an attack on their profession. It was a call for change that could ultimately strengthen their bond with the community. As the meeting progressed, the conversation became more constructive. Officers began to propose ideas for community engagement initiatives, training programs focused on bias reduction, and establishing a clear process for handling misconduct complaints. Elijah felt a swell of pride as he watched his colleagues rally around the idea of reform. But just as they were making progress, the precinct door swung open and a group of community members entered, their expressions filled with determination. The atmosphere shifted, the air thick with anticipation. "Captain Thompson, Captain Rivers," a woman called out, stepping forward. "We want to talk about what happened last night. We have concerns about how this department is handling our community." Elijah's heart raced as he glanced at Jasmine, who met his gaze with an encouraging nod. This was the moment they had been waiting for, a chance to bridge the gap between officers and the community they served. "Thank you for coming," Elijah said, gesturing for them to join the discussion. "We want to hear your concerns. This is an open forum for everyone, As the community members took their seats, the energy in the room shifted once again. The grassroots activists spoke passionately about their experiences, detailing incidents of police violence and the lack of accountability within the department. Each story was a stark reminder of the work that lay ahead. "We're here because we want to help you understand our pain," one young man said, his voice trembling. "We're not your enemies. We want to work with you, but we need to see real change." Elijah felt a pang of empathy as he listened to their testimonies. "We understand, and we're committed to doing better. We're here to listen, and we want to work together to create a safer community for everyone," he said, his heart aching for the lives affected by the very system he was a part of. As the discussion unfolded, the room became a space for dialogue, officers and community members sharing their hopes, fears, and aspirations for a better future. The energy was electric, a palpable sense of unity beginning to take shape. But as the voices merged into a chorus of hope, Hawkins' presence loomed like a storm cloud, ready to shatter the fragile connections they were forming. Elijah could sense the tension building, and he knew they had to remain vigilant. "Change is coming," Elijah said, his voice strong and resolute, "but it requires all of us to be a part of it. Together, we can confront the shadows of justice and work towards a brighter future for this city." As the meeting continued, the shadows of doubt began to recede, and hope flickered like a candle in the darkness. They were on the brink of something monumental, and Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose as they prepared to confront the challenges ahead. But deep down, he knew that the shadows would not dissipate easily. The fight for justice was far from over, and the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles. Yet, united in their mission, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead, determined to forge a path towards accountability, reform, and a community built on trust. As the voices filled the room, Elijah felt a surge of determination. They would not be silenced. They would stand together in the face of adversity and strive for the justice that had eluded them for far too long. The shadows of justice were shifting, and they were prepared to face the storm head-on. As the weeks turned into months, the echoes of the town hall meeting reverberated throughout the precinct and the community. Captain Elijah Thompson and Captain Jasmine Rivers had embarked on a journey that would forever alter the fabric of Atlanta, one built on dialogue, accountability, and a shared commitment to justice. Elijah stood outside the precinct one crisp morning, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting a warm glow over the city. He took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air, a stark contrast to the tension that once filled these walls. Change was underway, and despite the challenges that lay ahead, he felt hopeful for the future. Ready for another day of making history? Jasmine approached, her smile infectious as she joined him on the steps. "Always," he replied, though the weight of their mission was still palpable. "But we have to keep pushing. The reforms we've started need to take root." They had established community policing initiatives, mandatory de-escalation training for officers, and a new, transparent process for handling misconduct complaints. The once divided precinct was slowly transforming into a space where officers and community members could collaborate and work toward common goals. But the shadows of the past still loomed, especially with Officer Mike Hawkins refusing to adapt to the new culture. As they entered the precinct, Elijah and Jasmine were greeted by the sight of their colleagues engaged in discussions with community leaders, a vibrant atmosphere that had become the new normal. They walked past the break room, where Sergeant Maria Lopez was leading a training session on bias reduction. "Look at this," Jasmine said, nodding toward the room. "We've come so far," Elijah smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "And we won't stop until every last officer understands the importance of accountability." But just as they settled into their respective offices, the atmosphere shifted. A memo circulated around the precinct, and the tension returned as officers learned that Hawkins had filed a complaint against Elijah and Jasmine, alleging that their push for reform was causing division within the ranks. "Unbelievable," Jasmine muttered, her frustration evident as she slammed her office door shut. "He's trying to undermine everything we've worked for." Elijah clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "We can't let him derail our progress. This is just another attempt to intimidate us. Then let's confront him," Jasmine proposed, her voice steady. "We need to show him that we won't back down." Elijah nodded, realizing that this was the moment they had been preparing for. They gathered their evidence of the positive changes they had implemented and prepared for a showdown with Hawkins, determined to stand tall in the face of adversity. They approached the break room, where Hawkins had gathered a small group of officers, his voice loud and confrontational. "I'm telling you, this whole reform thing is a joke," he said, arms crossed defiantly. "We're police officers, not social workers. We need to be tough, not coddling criminals." Elijah's heart raced as he exchanged a glance with Jasmine. "This was it, Mike," Elijah called out, stepping into the room. "We need to talk." Hawkins turned, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced with hostility. "What do you want?" "Thompson, you're wasting everyone's time. We're here to address your complaint, your attitude." Jasmine interjected, her voice firm. "You're creating division, not unity." Hawkins scoffed, his expression dismissive. "Unity? You mean letting the community walk all over us?" "That's not how policing works." Elijah stepped forward, his voice steady but strong. "It's not about letting anyone walk over us. It's about building trust. The community deserves to feel safe, and if we don't change our approach, we risk losing that trust forever." Hawkins' eyes narrowed, his demeanor aggressive. "You really think you can change the culture of this department? You're just a naive officers playing a dangerous game. Naive or not, we've made significant progress," Jasmine countered, her voice unwavering. "The community is rallying behind us, and we have the support of many officers who believe in reform." Hawkins laughed, a harsh sound that resonated through the room. "You think community support means anything? They'll turn on you just like that when it suits them." Elijah felt a surge of determination. "You're wrong, Mike. People want to work with us, not against us. But you need to recognize that your approach is outdated and harmful. If you can't adapt, you're going to be left behind." The room fell silent, the tension thickening as officers exchanged uncertain glances. Elijah could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. They were at a turning point, and he knew they had to push through. "Either you join us in this effort, or you risk being on the wrong side of history," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "We won't back down. We're committed to accountability and reform." Hawkins glared at them, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "You think you can intimidate me? I've been a cop longer than both of you combined. You don't know what you're up against." Elijah stepped closer, his voice low but intense. "No, Mike, you don't understand what's at stake. This isn't just about us. It's about the community, the future of policing, and the lives affected by our actions." As Hawkins opened his mouth to retort, Sergeant Maria Lopez stepped forward, her presence commanding. "Enough, Mike," she said, her tone resolute. "We're not backing down. We're here to build a better department, and if you can't support that, then you need to reconsider your role here." Hawkins' expression darkened, but for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The room buzzed with tension, but Elijah and Jasmine stood firm, united in their mission for change. "Join us, Mike," Elijah urged. "Be part of the solution. We can't afford to fight amongst ourselves. The community is watching, and we need to show them that we can do better." With a heavy silence hanging in the air, Hawkins finally relented, the fight leaving his posture as he stepped back. "Fine, but don't expect me to play nice." Elijah felt a wave of relief wash over him. "We'll take that as a step forward." As the meeting concluded, Elijah and Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had stood their ground, faced their adversary, and emerged stronger. The shadows of justice had not disappeared, but they had illuminated a path forward. In the weeks that followed, they continued to implement reforms and build bridges between the department and the community. The changes were gradual, but the momentum was undeniable. Officers began to understand the importance of community relationships, and the once hostile atmosphere shifted toward collaboration. Hawkins, while still resistant, found himself increasingly isolated. The support for Elijah and Jasmine grew, and as the community rallied behind them, it became clear that the tides were turning. Ultimately, Hawkins faced disciplinary action for his behavior and was reassigned to a less influential role within the department. It was a necessary step toward healing the fractures within the precinct, paving the way for a new era of policing in Atlanta. Elijah and Jasmine stood together on the steps of the precinct one final time, looking out at the community they had fought so hard to protect. The shadows of justice still lingered, but they had made significant strides toward transparency and accountability. "We did it," Jasmine said, her voice filled with emotion. "We really did it," Elijah nodded, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. "And this is just the beginning. There's still work to be done, but I believe in the community. Together, we can create lasting change." As they stood side by side, watching the sun set over Atlanta, they knew that the fight for justice was ongoing. But they had found their voices, united in purpose, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Together," Elijah said, a smile breaking across his face. "Always," Jasmine replied, their resolve solidified. And as the shadows began to fade, the light of hope shone brighter than ever. What did you think of the story? Please leave your thoughts in the comments.